Good evening. How's everybody doing? Great to be learning with you on a Monday. I apologize, it started late. These tech difficulties, there's just no consistency to it. I was not able to start the show 3 times. YouTube was the issue, not Facebook. And then the 4th time, I didn't change anything. I just prayed that it would go through. And it did. So thank you, God. Thank you so much. Let's light up the darkness. Maybe the point was to remind me, to remind you, to pray for everything in our lives. There's nothing that we shouldn't pray for. When things are good, we should pray they stay good. When we have needs, we should pray that God will meet all our worthy, righteous, proper needs. There are things we feel we need, we think we need, we don't really need. All prayers are heard. They're not always answered in the way we would like them to be answered, but they are heard and answered in the way they're supposed to be answered, even if we can't understand it. Okay, who's in the house? Yehud in South Carolina, Sharon in New Jersey, Bill in Mid-Missouri, Melissa in Great Neck, Guy in Ohio, Stephen in Maine, Lucy in Minnesota, Lorraine in Texas, Nancy in North Carolina, Shandor in the Bronx, Belle in Texas, I'm Yisrael. Hi. Tom, Shavua Tov, Bella in Florida, Kevin. YouTube does it on purpose, no doubt. Tom loves the bell and the candle. Me too. Chaim in Florida, Marjorie in Georgia. This is on the YouTube side, and I'm so glad you're all here and it's working. Marjorie in Georgia, Ilanit in Silver Spring, Spencer in Connecticut, Marie in New York. Welcome, everybody. Okay, Nina, maybe you could change the header. It's actually a double DAF. So this is pages 101 and 102, and these would be numbers 1735 and 1736 of the pages in our journey from the first page to the 2711th page. That's how many there are in Shas, in the Babylonian Talmud. Okay, we are picking so pages 101 and 102. We're picking this up at the bottom of 100b. With Mishna number 8, the final Mishna here in chapter 6. And with God's help, we'll complete chapter 6 today. Mishnah 8. There is the case of one who sells a plot of land to another in order for him to construct for himself an underground catacomb. And similarly, the case of a contractor who receives a plot of land from another under a commission to construct for him a catacomb. So if the size of the catacomb was not specified, right, so here we are again. People are buying and selling or entering into a contract to buy and sell or to fabricate, but they weren't specific enough, and they just said, I need land enough for a catacomb, or build me a catacomb. Okay, so the word catacomb, what does it include according to the definition of our sages, the way that they would learn out from scripture what a person is selling when he's selling enough space for a catacomb, right? It's the minimum dimensions of a catacomb. So here we're learning a little bit about burial practices from a couple thousand years ago. And certainly there were bodies buried in the ground, in the dirt, more like what we're used to. But very common also to use a cave, or basically to create a cave for the purpose of burial. So just like we have the cave of Machpelah, which is in Hebron, where Abraham and Sarah and Isaac and Rebekah and Jacob and Leah are buried. The cave of the patriarchs and matriarchs. Rachel was not buried there. She was buried on the road to Ephrat. So this is when people were using a cave-like structure with niches in it, as we're going to be talking about. So there's a little bit of an illustration of an ancient one there. So it's a cave, and I know it's hard to see, but that kind of dark area to the right of the kind of opening, there's like a dark area, and that's one of these niches. And then over here is kind of the arrangement. Once you walk into that cave, there's those like seems like rods extending out of the chamber. Those are the burial niches, right, where coffins would be inserted. Okay, so that's the concept. So one sells to another a catacomb or contracts to have a catacomb created, and they didn't specify how big or how many niches. So what's going to be the minimum? So if the size of the catacomb was not specified, then he should make the inside of each burial chamber 4 cubits wide by 6 cubits long, and open up into the chamber by digging into its walls 8 burial niches, known as kuchen, in which the coffins will rest. 3 niches should be opened up from the wall here along the length of the chamber, and 3 from there along the other side, and 2 niches in the wall that's facing the entrance, and thus we have 8 niches. And these niches should be formed so that their length is 4 cubits, and their height is 7 hand breadths. A little bit interesting there, 4 cubits, so that's about 6 feet, including the coffin. And right there you get that sense that people 2,000 years ago, not as tall as people are today, generally speaking. So that the niches, they're 4 cubits in length, and their height is 7 hand breadths, and their width is 6 hand breadths. Now we're on page 101a. Rabbi Shimon says he should construct the inside of each burial chamber 6 cubits wide by 8 cubits long, a larger chamber, and open up into the chamber by digging into its walls 13 burial niches. How are we going to get to 13? There's going to be 4 on one wall, 4 on the other. That's 8. And we're going to have 3 in the facing wall, and that's 11, right? That's 11. And then 2 out of the corners, like diagonally extending away from the chamber. And we end up with 13 niches per chamber, right? 13 niches per burial chamber. The Mishnah describes the general structure of the catacomb, and he must fashion a courtyard at the entrance of the burial chamber that should be 6 cubits by 6 cubits, which is equal to the combined length of the bier, B-I-E-R, of the deceased and those who bury him, to ensure adequate room for the burial to take place. In other words, so that people can stage carrying the coffin, enter the burial chamber, and get it into the niche. They need a little bit of space to do that in the courtyard before they enter the chamber, the burial chamber, and then the niches open up out of the burial chamber. And he should open up 2 burial chambers into the courtyard, right? So according to the first opinion, where there's 8 niches out of every chamber, so each courtyard is going to have 2 chambers. Each chamber has 8 niches. And then according to the second opinion, that there are 13 niches in each chamber. So it would be 1 courtyard, 2 chambers, and each chamber has 13 niches. So each courtyard has 26 burial niches associated with it. But Rabbi Shimon doesn't stop there. Rabbi Shimon says he should open up 4 burial chambers. The courtyard should have a burial chamber on each of its 4 sides. So there would be 4 times 26 niches, right? 104. So 104 burial niches per courtyard. And Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel says, who's not Rabbi Shimon, different Rabbi Shimon. This is Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel, the Nasi of his generation. Everything is dependent on the nature of the bedrock. If the bedrock is hard and strong, it will be able to accommodate more niches, which can be more closely spaced together, with less bedrock between them. But if the bedrock is softer, then fewer and more sparsely spaced niches should be formed so that the walls between the niches don't collapse. That's Mishnah number 8. Now the Gemara. In Rabbi Shimon's depiction, so there was the anonymous Tan of our Mishnah, then there was Rabbi Shimon, and then Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel added that it all depends on how firm the bedrock is. So now we're talking about the minority opinion of Rabbi Shimon. In Rabbi Shimon's depiction of a burial chamber, he states that 2 niches should be opened up, one from the right of the entrance and one from the left. And the Gemara asks, these 2 niches, in which direction does he set them? If they are directed toward the outside of the chamber, i.e. under the floor of the courtyard, won't people trample over them when they enter the courtyard, which is improper? And furthermore, didn't we learn in the Mishnah, Ocholot 15:8, with regard to the courtyard of a catacomb, one who stands inside it is ritually pure because it can be presumed that he did not stand over a dead body. So clearly, these niches are not to be dug underneath the courtyard. So the problem is, and that's what the second illustration, see the lower one with all the extra niches, that's according to the opinion of Rabbi Shimon. So if you are standing in that courtyard, which is in the middle of that busy figure, well, how did you get there? You must have walked over a grave if these catacombs are below the ground, which is what we're talking about. This is below the ground. There's no way to reach that courtyard without walking over bodies. And so if it's a rule that you're not allowed to walk over any bodies, like any buried bodies, in order to reach the courtyard, how does Rabbi Shimon's opinion work? And the answer is in a note here from Rav Steinsaltz, that while it says that there should be a path so that one can get to a courtyard, if possible, without walking over bodies, that doesn't mean that it is prohibited to walk over dead bodies. Very often, it's almost assumed that if you're walking through a cemetery, you will walk over dead bodies, and that is permitted. That's why people who are Kohanim, won't enter a graveyard unless they are burying a very close relative, because Kohanim are not supposed to become impure, tameh, for the dead. When they're saying don't trample, meaning there shouldn't be a path over burial sites, over graves, if it's possible not to. But if it's not possible to have such a path, we're not concerned, because it's not like a path over graves is going to become a common path. People are only going to traverse that path when they're involved in visiting the dead or burying the dead. So it's not going to be such a common occurrence. It's not like we would ever, create a path as a shortcut to go, from one town to another through a graveyard, right? That would be disrespectful of the dead. Rabbi Yosei, the son of Rabbi Hanina, said, with regard to this array of niches of Rabbi Shimon, he makes these 2 niches at the side of the entrance vertically, like a door bolt. The Gemara challenges this explanation, but doesn't Rabbi Yochanan say, with regard to the burial of people in a vertical position, this is like a burial of donkeys, and it is disrespectful. We don't bury people vertically, up and down. They have to be laid to rest, right? They're lying in a lying position. So the Gemara answers, according to the opinion of Rabbi Yochanan, each of these 2 niches is formed in a different corner of the chamber, aligned diagonally away from the chamber's cavity, as we discussed at the outset. The Gemara challenges, but if so, won't the niches located around the corners touch one another? According to Rabbi Yochanan's suggestion, there are in fact 3 niches located at each of the 2 back corners. One is recessed into the wall of the length of the chamber at right angles to it. Another is recessed in the back wall of the chamber, also at right angles to it. And a third that extends diagonally away from the chamber. And the ends of these three niches will overlap, causing there to be too little space in them to fulfill the minimum required distance. And Rav Ashi said it is possible to do this where, when constructing the niches that extend diagonally away from the chamber, one deepens them, i.e. forms them lower down in the wall than the other niches adjacent to them. As if you do not say that this is a solution, then how would the four chambers depicted by Rabbi Shimon be constructed? Won't the niches touch one another? Perforce, if he's got chambers extending out of all four sides of the courtyard, and then the niches extend out of the burial chambers, the niches would run into each other. So it must be that, and this is why there's sort of two different shades of gray. There's the two chambers going right and left, and the two chambers going up and down, and those are at different levels in the earth, right? The ones that are right and left are either over or under the ones that extend up and down away from the courtyard. So the niches of one chamber would overlap those of the other adjacent to it. So rather, it is possible to arrange the niches only where, when constructing the niches of two chambers at opposite ends of the courtyard, one deepens them, i.e. forms them lower down in the wall than the niches of the other two chambers that are adjacent to them. And here too, it is a case in which one deepens one layer. Rav Huna, the son of Rav Yehoshua, said there is an alternative explanation. It is possible to fashion the four chambers depicted by Rabbi Shimon, where one constructs them so that all the niches extend diagonally away from the cavity of the chamber, like the leaves of a palm branch, which have spread out from the grave, like that. If formed in this way, the niches of adjacent chambers will not overlap, even if they are in the same depth. The Gemara notes, and this statement of Rav Huna, the son of Rav Yehoshua, is an error, because it is not possible to form all the niches in this way, since the length of the diagonal of every square whose side is 1 cubit is 1 2/5 cubits. There's some geometry for you. Each chamber is 8 cubits long, which means that between the two adjacent chambers, placed at right angles to each other, there is a square area of 8 cubits by 8 cubits into which the niches of these two chambers must be formed. How much is the diagonal of that area? 11 1/5 cubits. How many niches have to fit in that space? 8. How can you find that 8 niches can possibly fit into 11 1/5 cubits? Each of the niches is a cubit wide, and there must be a cubit of wall, a cubit of bedrock between each niche. So to accommodate this, one would need an area of at least 15 cubits. So rather, this statement of Rav Huna, the son of Rav Yehoshua, must be an error. We don't arrange them like a palm branch. Rather, it must be that when we were talking about Rabbi Shimon's arrangement, there's going to be two strata, one above the other. The Gemara provides an alternative solution to the problem of the niches at the corners overlapping, or if you wish, say as Rav Shesha, the son of Rav Edi, said in answer to a similar question, it is referring to non-viable newborns, which require only very small burial niches. And similarly here too, the niches at the corners of the chambers were used for non-viable newborns. Probably, babies that died in childbirth was much more common then than it is now. The Gemara considers another Mishna that relates to the structure of a catacomb. We learned in a Mishna there, Tractate Nazir, page 64b, with regard to one who finds a corpse while inspecting a place that was not previously established as a cemetery, to ensure that it is free of tuma, of ritual impurity, and the corpse is in other words, he is inspecting a field. It's been used as a farm field, and now they're going to build houses there. So they're digging to create foundations, and while they're digging, they find a skeleton. They find the remains. They find human remains. So now they're concerned. Why is there a body here? Was this the victim of a murder? Was this a member of the farmer's family and he just decided to bury in a field rather than have a funeral? What's going on here? The concern is perhaps in an earlier age, a forgotten age, this was a cemetery. Now, once you find a body, right? If you're going to be building there, this is going to be a place of habitations. This is going to be a place where you're going to, even create a paved courtyard, whatever. We need to know that there's not other bodies there. So the question is, okay, we found a body. Is this evidence that there was a graveyard here or there was just one body? So we're going to have to start digging nearby. And if we don't find other bodies, okay, this was a one-off thing. We're going to remove those remains, put them in a proper graveyard, and now we can assume that the rest of this area, this land, is free of tuma, free of graves that will cause tuma, ritual impurity, to people who walk over this area. What if we find two bodies? Well, if it's two bodies, we can still assume that this was an unusual occurrence, and we can disinter them and move them to a graveyard. What if we find three bodies and they're arranged parallel to each other in the way that Jewish remains are buried in a cemetery? Now we have to be concerned that this was a graveyard in some earlier age. And now we have to figure out, well, so first of all, this is a graveyard, so we cannot disturb the dead that are lying here. This has to be restored to its status as a graveyard. And the question is, how big is this graveyard? How far does it extend so that we can't build other stuff on top of it? We're going to have to dig around, poke around, and figure out how big a graveyard this is. So that's the discussion now. Okay, where am I? Yeah. So we learned in the Mishna there, Tractate Nazir, with regard to one who finds a corpse while inspecting a place, to check that, to make sure that it's free of tuma, free of ritual impurity. And this corpse is lying in the usual manner of Jewish burial. So he removes it from there, and he also removes its surrounding earth. And similarly, because there might be pieces of corpse in the surrounding earth. And similarly, if he finds two corpses buried in the usual manner, he removes them and their surrounding earth. Since only one or two corpses were found, it may be assumed that the area is not a cemetery. Therefore, the corpses may be removed. Now we're on page 102a. If he found three corpses lying parallel to each other, then if there is between them, i.e. the outer two corpses, a distance of between 4 and 8 cubits, then this is presumed to be a graveyard, and the corpses may not be removed. And he must examine from that spot outward 20 cubits to discover whether there are other corpses buried within that circle with a radius of 20 cubits. And he must continue to examine from the place he finds that corpse outward another 20 cubits. And he continues to search for additional corpses. Even if only one corpse was found within the 20 cubits, as there is a basis for anticipating the matter, it is probable that he has stumbled upon an ancient cemetery. And he is not permitted to relocate the corpses, despite the fact that if he had found the single corpse by itself at first, without being aware of the grave site, he would have been permitted to remove it and its surrounding earth. A one-off or two-off bodies, he can remove. But if it's a graveyard, even if it's only three bodies, he's going to have to leave it there, and this ground cannot be used for development, building houses, creating a park, playground, nothing. It's a graveyard. Now, the Gemara analyzes that Mishnah. The master said if there is between them a distance of 4 to 8 cubits, then it is presumed to be a graveyard. And the reason is that corpses buried in this manner are indicative of the standard layout of a burial chamber. And the fact that this is said only when the distance between the corpses is between 4 and 8 cubits assumes that the size of a burial chamber is 4 cubits by 8 cubits. Based on this, the Gemara asks, whose opinion is this? If it is the opinion of the rabbis in the Mishnah above on page 100b, didn't they say that the size of a burial chamber is 4 cubits by 6 cubits? And if it is the opinion of Rabbi Shimon, didn't he say that a burial cave is 6 cubits by 8 cubits? So the Gemara answers, actually, this Mishnah is in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Shimon. And it is in accordance with another version of Rabbi Shimon's opinion, which is cited by this Tana, as it is taught in a Baraisa, if one found 3 corpses lying in close succession, and there is not a distance of 4 cubits to 8 cubits between them, i.e., they're lying closer together than that, less than 4 cubits apart, then they have the law of the requirement to move the surrounding earth in which they are buried, but they are not considered to be part of a graveyard, since permanent graves are not placed so closely together. Perforce, their corpses were originally buried there on a temporary basis, but then they were never reinterred. So Rabbi Shimon ben Yehuda says, in the name of Rabbi Shimon, the corpses in the middle are viewed as if they are not there, i.e., as if they were buried there incidentally, and the other corpses thereby combine to form a graveyard in which corpses are found with a distance of 4 cubits to 8 cubits between them. So the fact that there were 3 all close together, that's unusual, but we just assume that, the one body in the middle was there for some odd reason, but the other 2 are the proper distance apart, and so this is a cemetery. The Gemara asks, in accordance with which opinion did you interpret the Mishnah? If it is in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Shimon, then say the latter clause of that Mishnah, if he finds an area of graves, he must examine from there outward 20 cubits to discover whether there are other corpses buried there or not. Since the burial formation is indicative of burial within a burial chamber of a catacomb, he should continue to investigate the whole area that would have been occupied by a catacomb. And the Gemara asks, whose opinion is this? If it is the opinion of Rabbi Shimon, the distance one should be required to examine would be 22 cubits, which is the total length of a catacomb, i.e. the 2 chambers of 8 cubits with a courtyard of 6 cubits between them. And if it is the opinion of the rabbis, the distance one should be required to examine would be 18 cubits, as each catacomb consists of 2 chambers 6 cubits long, with a chamber of 6 cubits, with a courtyard of 6 cubits between them. And the Gemara answers, actually, the Mishnah is in accordance with the opinion of the rabbis, and it is necessary to examine 20 cubits in a case where he examined along the diagonal of the catacomb, which is longer than its length. So the Gemara asks, but since he examined this chamber along the diagonal, this second chamber on the other side of the courtyard should also be examined along the diagonal. If so, that would be 22 cubits. And the Gemara answers, we say he should examine 1 chamber along the diagonal, but we don't say that he should examine 2 chambers along the diagonal. And now on 102b, Rav Shesha, the son of Rav Edi, said, actually the Mishnah is in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Shimon. And here we are dealing with a case where the corpses found were of non-viable newborns, babies, buried in a smaller chamber, only 6 cubits long, because they don't need such big coffins, adding a courtyard of 6 cubits and another regular-sized chamber of 8 cubits yields a total length of the catacomb of 20 cubits. So the Gemara asks, but since this is dealing with a chamber that was created for bearing non-viable newborns, there too, with regard to that chamber on the other side of the courtyard, we're dealing with a chamber created for non-viable newborns as well. Therefore, the total length of the catacomb would be 18 cubits. The Gemara answers, we say that perhaps one of the chambers is for non-viable newborns, but we do not say that 2 chambers might have been constructed for non-viable newborns. And so, searching outward from where the bodies were found, 20 cubits in every direction. If you don't find any more bodies, okay, so we can assume that was the extent of the little cemetery. But if you do find bodies, now you're going to have to start, and then looking 20 more cubits beyond that. Above, the Gemara cited a Baraisa that relates a dispute between Rabbi Shimon and the rabbis with regard to 3 corpses buried close together. And the rabbis hold that this is not considered a graveyard because they were too close together for the spacing of a graveyard, whereas Rabbi Shimon says, no, it can be a graveyard because we say that the middle body, it's as if it wasn't there. So the Gemara raises a contradiction from another ruling of the rabbis against the ruling of the rabbis, and it also raises a contradiction from another ruling of Rabbi Shimon against the ruling of Rabbi Shimon. So as it is taught in a Mishnah, Tractate Kilayim 5:2, with regard to a vineyard that is planted on an area where there is less than 4 cubits of open space between the rows of vines. And Rabbi Shimon says it is not considered to be a vineyard with regard to the prohibition of diverse kinds and other laws because it's overcrowded. If the rows are closer together than 4 cubits each, this vineyard cannot thrive because the vines don't have enough room to grow. It's going to die. So if there's 2 rows planted that close together, it's not a vineyard. One of those rows is going to die or be uprooted. And then what you're left with is a row of vines, 1 row of vines. And 1 row of vines, it does not a vineyard make. 2 rows would make a vineyard, but they have to be at least 4 cubits apart. So this crowding is the issue. So Rabbi Shimon says if they're closer together than 4 cubits, it's not a vineyard. And the rabbis say this is considered to be a vineyard. And the reason for this is that if you've got 3 rows and each of them, let's say they're only 2 cubits apart, the 3 rows. So Rabbi Shimon would say this is not a vineyard. They're all too close together. The rabbis say the middle row is going to be uprooted or it's going to die. And then the outer rows, which are 4 cubits apart, they constitute the vineyard. So we would say we'd set aside the middle row and we call it a vineyard. Now, the ruling of the rabbis in this Mishnah is difficult, as it is contradicted by the ruling of the rabbis in the Baraisa. As there, the rabbis did not say that the middle ones are viewed as if they are not there, here with respect to the graves. And the ruling of Rabbi Shimon in this Mishnah is difficult, as it is contradicted by the ruling of Rabbi Shimon in the Baraisa. As there, he did say the corpses in the middle are viewed as if they are not there. So since he doesn't say that with regard to the vineyard, why does he say it with regard to the corpses? And since the rabbis said it with regard to the vineyard, why didn't they say it with regard to the corpses? I'm very close to done. Questions or comments, please get them in now. So the Gemara answers, the fact that one ruling of Rabbi Shimon is contradicted by the other ruling of Rabbi Shimon, this is not difficult. La kasha. There, with regard to vineyards, Rabbi Shimon holds that middle vines cannot be disregarded, as people do not plant vines with the intention of uprooting them. But here, with regard to burial, sometimes it happens that one has to bury a corpse at twilight just before Shabbos, and indiscriminately inters the body between other corpses with the intention of reburying it at a later date, and then for whatever reason, the reburial didn't happen. And similarly, the fact that one ruling of the rabbis is contradicted by the other ruling of the rabbis is also not difficult, because here with regard to burial, since it is a disgrace to bury bodies so close together, it is not called an area of graves. But there, with regard to vineyards, the owner of the vineyard might say to himself, okay, so whichever one of these rows flourishes, I'll leave it standing, and the one that doesn't flourish, I will uproot. So he might plant vines too close together with the intention that he will uproot later, contrary to the opinion of Rabbi Shimon. And the one that he uproots, he will use for firewood. And that concludes our discussion of Mishnah number 8 here at the end of chapter 6. And with that, we conclude chapter 6. So with God's help, we will open chapter 7 tomorrow at the regular time, 6 p.m. Pacific. I'll answer a few questions now, but reminder that on Wednesday, we will have class at noon Pacific, which is Erev Rosh Hashanah. So we will have the class at noon Pacific. And then we'll post the holiday schedule. Nina already sent it out on our weekly email from Accidental Talmudist. If you're not a subscriber, you certainly should be. So you can just go to accidentaltalmudist.org and sign up for the newsletter. It just goes out once a week. It's filled with beautiful Torah, humor, links to all of our daily classes, a meme. It's just a beautiful weekly bulletin to get, and you should certainly be a subscriber. But we will also post the holiday schedule on the Facebook page, right? So generally speaking, we will have a class on the Friday before Rosh Hashanah, before Yom Kippur. Yom Kippur coincides with Shabbos this year. So we'll have a class that Friday at noon, but we won't have a class after Yom Kippur. which would be Saturday night. Like we usually have a Saturday night class after Shabbos ends. But you know what? After Yom Kippur ends, we're going to be busy eating and recovering from our fast. And that night, we won't have a class. So just to make sure you know what the schedule is going to be, check the Facebook page, but also be a subscriber to our email blast. And you can subscribe at accidentaltalmudist.org. And then you'll find the link to the newsletter if you're not prompted as soon as you get there. Okay. Sharon, when did they start using coffins? In Israel, they just used a shroud, and many still use a shroud in Israel. Yeah, I was almost a little surprised, especially when I was thinking about niches in a catacomb. Like, I thought that would be the perfect place to just put the body on its bier, sort of wrapped in the shroud into the niche. But the note here, the translation from Rav Steinsaltz is definitely saying coffins. So perhaps this reflects the burial practices in Bava, right, the Jewish community in Babylonia. I don't know. I'd like to learn more about that myself. Tom, wow, what a short DAF. Is this the shortest? Seems like one of. Very short DAF indeed. Sharon, I have been working with the chief rabbi in Poland to restore the Jewish cemetery in my dad's former shtetl. It is a very, very exacting and demanding job to be sure you are restoring the full area with a proper wall. Wow, Yasher Koach. May you be strengthened in this beautiful and important task. There are so many Jewish cemeteries in Europe, towns that were once Jewish towns where so many Jews were killed in the Holocaust, and after the war, people didn't go back. They emigrated to America or to Israel or other places. And these towns are just abandoned as Jewish towns. The cemetery falls into disrepair. Very often they are, vandalized and otherwise debased and disgraced. It's horrible. So there definitely are burial societies that are working to restore cemeteries in various Jewish cemeteries in various parts of Europe. But the job is such a big and vast job. So Sharon, you're really to be commended for doing that, and may you be completely successful in that task. And we say amen. And Vanessa, final question. Interesting that I'm here listening to this due to my family's situation. My father-in-law, Orlando's dad, passed away this past Shabbat. Baruch Dayan Emes. Blesses God, the true judge. I'm so sorry to hear this news. May you be comforted at this difficult time. And the family is right now dealing with the cemetery. So obviously Jewish cemeteries, at least any proper Jewish cemetery, is working with rabbis to get all these kinds of halachas, all these laws correct in place. So you don't have to worry. Are the laws being? Hopefully, you don't have to worry about the laws being obeyed. You have much more personal issues to deal with. And may you be comforted and strengthened at this very difficult time. That's what I've got for us today. And with God's help, we'll be together again tomorrow, Tuesday, regular Tuesday time, 6 p.m.